First, I'd like to thank the Sisters of St. Joseph and Bond Ministries for giving me the opportunity to come and speak to you today. I was quite interested and intrigued by it. Normally, what I do for the Archdiocese is I go to the parishes, including Catholic cemeteries, and when called upon to do so, I talk about finances, charitable giving, insurance, gifts in a will, things of that nature. And so to be able to put it, I guess, in a bit more clarity, even for myself, was a welcomed opportunity. So once again, thank you for having me here to speak to you today. The first thing I want to mention is that really when it comes to our finances, we're really dealing with two worlds. We're dealing with, on one hand, the world, which tells us how we should handle our finances. And of course, we're dealing with God, who typically has a bit of a different idea than the world does. And so the first thing I want to talk about is we're pretty much raised to begin thinking about our finances. It really begins when we graduate, when we go to university, if we go to trade school, and we begin to work, and we have to be responsible for an income and paying our own bills. And so from there, what happens is, obviously, we have to buy a car, right? And so in the world, your status symbol is the car you drive. If you drive a BMW, people know what you earn, typically. If you drive a beat-up Mustang, people know what you earn, typically. Then that moves into the housing we have. Can we afford to buy a home, condo? Can we even afford to purchase? Then as more time goes on, that begins to move into how we fill those possessions in our home. Then, of course, it graduates into we have to take a break from it all and get away from the hard work and also save for our retirement, things of that nature. And what begins to happen is as we focus on these things more and more in our lives, we begin to notice that there's a certain ideal that the world sets in front of us, and that ideal typically is glamour. And so we begin to chase that glamour. And as more time goes on, obviously we follow celebrity. And celebrities live a certain way, and we look to emulate, or our culture does, the ways those celebrities live. And in order to do that, we have to maintain a certain budget. We have to buy certain clothes. We have to look a certain way. And so as more time goes on, we begin to get locked more and more and more into that material way of viewing the world. And of course, to be in that world, you have to look a certain way. And then as more time goes on, it becomes life's too short to wear boring clothes. And that's really what the world teaches us. Now, once we get trapped into that cycle, we typically have to go into debt to afford those things. Because a lot of times we may not earn what we need to live that lifestyle. Obviously, debt becomes a trap. Our savings begin to diminish. And we've seen, and these articles are all from the last, I'd say, 2 weeks. And so in the March of month, Equifax, which is a company that deals with debt, came out with a report that said Canadians are beginning more and more and more to sink into debt. And Maclean's had an interesting title that said, and this was just on March the 12th. I don't know if you can see it from there, but it says Canadians can't stop lying to themselves about their debt. And what happens is the more and more and more we get into debt, then obviously the more stress things become. The phone calls start if we can't manage that debt, if we can't pay it. And then what happens is we begin to get stressed out. We get calls at work. People begin, we feel threatened. And you can't hide, right? We can't hide. And so if we follow that pattern, that's where things begin to lead us. And of course, really what I was hoping to talk to you today about was peace. How we can begin to view our finances, fiscal responsibility, so that we don't have to get involved in that chase. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Christian virtue and finances, and really that involves unity of life. I'm going to talk a bit about social justice and finances, and really where do you recognize Christ? And that'll become a bit clearer as we go throughout the talk. And finally, time to reflect. What are your thoughts? And that'll really come when we go into the question and answer section. And so the first thing I want to mention is that when it comes to unity of life, right now, I would suggest that the great confusion of the modern era is, I don't know who I am. You see the typical term people always saying, I need to find myself, right? They need to get away from it all. I don't know who I am. And so what happens is some people, they choose to fill that with some form of spirituality, maybe spiritism or the New Age movement, or somewhere where they can begin to feel that they're connected to something more than just the trappings of the world. And there's other people who decide to jump into the world head first. And they disregard God, and they buy into the materialism to shop the pain away, so that they begin to numb themselves on that journey. And so really what I wanted to talk about as well is when it comes to our finances is becoming like Christ. And really to become like Christ is to become a saint. And so of course that begs the question, who is he? Because a lot of times we may not know who he is. And we may think, I'm in a situation where someone's talking negatively about my faith and I don't know how to respond. And maybe we be quiet. And after we feel maybe a sense of guilt for not having spoken up, maybe we feel our finances, we feel we're not living in a Christian world or a Christian ideal as to what we're supposed to do and who we're supposed to be. And so one quote that I found that I thought was a good one to use was that not all of us can be rich, wise, famous, yet all of us, yes, all of us are called to be saints. And that's really what, at the end of the day, our mission is about. And the first thing I'll mention is that the saints were sinners. They were sinners. And we typically don't think of them that way because we have this view that they were like almost false flowers, fake flowers, that they're so perfect that unless we're like Mother Teresa or someone else and give everything up and move to some distant land, that we can't become a saint ourselves. And what I would suggest is during the course of the conversation that in fact, yes, we can. And our finances can be a tool within the scope of our idea of unity of life that we can use to essentially become a saint. And so the first thing I'll mention is, and the reason I have the Olympic symbol up here, if you're wondering, is because a lot of us may have had dreams of achieving something big, right? For myself, I always wanted to go to the Olympics, But I can tell you, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it, and I'm okay with that. I'm not going to be an astronaut. I've accepted that. I'm not going to the Olympics. I'm okay with that. But what we can do is we have the opportunity to enter into the arena of the supernatural Olympics, right? And that's really the world of becoming a saint. And so, St. Paul, towards the end of his life, in 2 Timothy 4:7, was given the grace to say, I have competed well, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. And so ourselves can begin to adopt that thinking when we deal with our finances. And so a lot of times we may ask ourselves, okay, great, I've heard the comment, become a saint, it's a big, I don't know how to do it. I don't even know who Christ in some instances is, and I don't even know who I'm supposed to be in a lot of instances. So how can I know how to become a saint? And fortunately, the church over time has given us, in her wisdom, a roadmap. And so that essentially, one of the roadmaps we can use, and especially dealing with our finances, is the concept of virtue and the concept of vice. Now, we may have all seen books about virtue. There's literally thousands of them written, 300 pages each, about virtue. And the simple reality of a virtue is, all it is a good habit. That's it. A virtue is a good habit. And it becomes a habit when it ceases to be difficult. So that's it. A virtue is a good habit. What is a vice? It's a bad habit. That's it. That's all it is. It's a bad habit. And so what happens is how is a habit formed? A habit is formed through repetition. That's it. So if you do a good thing repeatedly, it becomes your habit. If you do a bad thing repeatedly, it becomes your habit. And that's where the interior struggle comes about, when we struggle within ourselves. So just very briefly, the vices and virtues, you can just look them up, but the ones I'll be focusing on, really, there are seven virtues and 7 vices. And each virtue is designed to offset the corresponding vice that we may have trouble with. So for example, since we're talking about faith and finances and money, and all these work together, I'll focus on temperance and gluttony and charity and greed. Okay? So if I have a problem, for example, with greed, I would need to do acts of charity. Because what happens then is that offsets that vice. And if I do more and more and more charitable works, What happens as time goes on, it becomes easier to be a charitable person to the point where I just do it without even thinking. It's the same thing with gluttony. And gluttony doesn't have to just be food. Gluttony can be material possessions. It can be you have a disordered affection with a car you drive or something of that nature. So what you do is, over time, you use temperance. And temperance is keeping yourself in check, right? A good example is if there's a bowl of potato chips, okay? I can't eat one potato chip. I'll tell you, I have to have at least 10. There's a bowl there. And I'll probably eat it all, okay? So what happens then is, if I had to exercise temperance against that gluttony of eating those chips, what I would do is I would have one. And then that's it. And no matter how hard I wanted to have that next chip, I wouldn't. And what would happen is, at first, it may be a struggle, really intense, really hard. But then, the next time, it's a little bit easier. The next time, a little more easier. Next time, it's easier until the day comes, through the repetition of that act of building that habit, where it's no longer even an issue. I can say no to that potato chip anytime. And so when we look at that with respect to finances and, let's say, possessions of others, let's say this guy right here, okay? Here's an example. He's walking down the street, sees his neighbor's house, his neighbor's moving, never liked the guy anyway, right? Sees he's moving, guess what's happening? Gets the opportunity. The truck's open. There's a TV. Walks by, takes a look at it, thinks, nobody can see me. He takes it. Okay, he steals it. Now, when he steals it, at the time, he may go through guilt after, right? He may be thinking, I should have took that TV, but I can't return it because I'll get caught, and then he has an internal struggle with himself. Now, what happens is the next time he comes to steal something, it may be a little bit easier to do. Maybe the internal struggle isn't as intense. Then the next time he steals, it's easier. The next time he steals, it's easier, until eventually it becomes a habit. And I don't know if you've ever met anybody with a criminal mind. I've actually met one person once in my life who had a criminal mind. And what happened is everything they looked at, they were always looking for the angle. It was always, okay, well, how can I get around this, or get around that, or get this for myself, or get that for myself? And so what happens is you develop that over time through the acts that you do. Now, let's say this same guy, okay, virtue, what is a good habit? Goes, sees his neighbors moving, walks away. And I got him walking in the dark because maybe it was really hard for him to walk away. Maybe he was struggling to leave that van. But guess what? He's walking into the light. And then one day, what will happen to him, if he keeps doing that, is he may begin to see it's an opportunity to help in the charity of another. And what he could do then is even help somebody move he doesn't like, if he can get to that level. And so that's the supernatural Olympics. You keep raising the bar, like in high jump, and jumping over it until one day you get to the point where you can clear that bar absolutely no problem. And so let's say we look at our purchases as an example too. So, right, shopping, right? You see something, you want to buy it. It's normal, right? Then what happens is you lose a bit of control. So you go, and what do you do? You use your credit cards, right? And that leads back into the first screen I had when I was flipping through and showing the shopping to the world. So what we do is we justify to ourselves that we need that thing. And, for myself, for example, I came from work. I have to dress like this for work. It's just a reality. I deal on a financial nature. I deal with financial people. You have to look a certain way. So it's not wrong to have to look a certain way. But what it is when that begins to control you and it becomes the idol of your life. And so, for example, let's say if you have to look a certain way. Well, what you can do is you can go and you can see something you really like, right? Not a bad thing, you need it, right? It's an object, right? It's a thing, but it becomes a means and not an end in itself. So you keep an eye on it, right? Guess what? One day it goes on sale, right? And then you buy it, right? So you've saved money, you've exercised self-control, right? Which includes temperance. You're using the resources God has given you in a good way, right? And then the 40% you save, you obviously can use in other ways. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move on. So let's say, for example, budgets, okay? Now, I know very few people who actually like to do a budget. Very few people, myself included. I mean, very few people like to do them. There's that old saying, right? You know how it's always the mechanic who has the worst car, right? Because once he does this stuff all day, he doesn't like to do his own. Well, it's the same for me, right? I look at my own finances, right? I've been talking about this all day. So now you got this gentleman here, okay? So he starts off, I'm going to look at my budget, okay? Now, maybe this is me, maybe it's not, I'm not going to say. So what happens then is time goes on, right? You start getting tired. Then boom, that's it. Right? And so what happens is that you lose that opportunity to work through it even when you're tired, to gain that virtue. And every time we have a cross, it's an opportunity to gain a virtue. That's why so many saints have said they pray for crosses. I mean, I never got that. I mean, why would anybody want a cross? I don't get it. You know? But it's an opportunity to exercise virtue in cooperation with grace, because we never do anything on our own. And God will give us just enough struggle that we can meet it, and the next time the bar gets raised a little bit higher. So it's a progression in our lives that never stops. It never stops. And with unity of life, it goes through all your life, including your finances as well. Now, let's say you had a virtue. Remember, a virtue, all it really is a good habit. That's it. So, this young lady sitting down to do her finances. Time goes on, right? She's tired. That's okay. But she gets it done. She sticks with it. And then the next time, like I said, that she's got to push herself in something else she doesn't like to do, she'll be able to do it. And so really, that's the acquisition of virtue. Another example, investing. Okay? So, now this is actually a story that when I was a financial advisor, I spent some time up in northern Saskatchewan. Okay? Now, if you want to get as far away as Bay Street as you can, go to northern Saskatchewan. Okay? I worked in a small town. I was covering off a lady's mat leave, right? So I was there. I didn't know anybody. The Royal Bank said, "That's where you're going?" I said, "All right, that's where I'm going." So I went, right? And so I'm there. I don't know anybody in town. And if you ever know a small town in Saskatchewan, they go back like 6 generations. So I was a complete outsider, right? One day, this gentleman comes to my office. He was a farmer. So I was talking to him. And by this point, because I had nothing to do, I was always taking courses on finances. Like, that's just what I did because I didn't even have a TV at the time because I just graduated university, right? And when you just graduate, you're always a little person on the totem pole and you got to go wherever they tell you. Didn't have a TV, so I was taking financial courses all the time. I took everything the bank offered. And so what happened is one day this gentleman comes to my office, and this was in around the big tech boom in around 2000, 2001. And at this point, I had my Canadian securities course, and so he had said to me that his intent is he wanted to borrow against his family farm to buy some investments. And as I said, Saskatchewan is the furthest place away from Bay Street, but I can tell you, at that time when the tech boom was going on, everybody, and I mean everybody, was talking about the easy money that you could make buying tech stocks. Everybody was. I used to go home at lunch, and and the personal banker that worked there, he and I used to talk about, we should open up a securities account. They're giving them to everybody. We could open one up, and and it was just literally something would come up for offering. You'd buy it. That day, it was worth double. It was really booming. And so this guy comes to my office and says, "You know what? I'm going to borrow against the family farm, and I'm going to put it in tech stocks." And so I talked to him about it, and I tried to talk him out of it. I said to him, diversify your money. Put some into bonds, put some into cash. But I talked to him about the basic 1, 2, 3s of investing. And I talked to him for probably about a good 20 to 30 minutes about why he shouldn't do it. And so before he left my office, he said, no, I'm doing it. I'm going to bet the family farm. And you think about it, a family farm isn't something that you just go buy yourself. It's called a family farm for a reason, because in Saskatchewan, they're usually handed down over 4 generations. So this is something that his great-great-great-grandfather would have toiled for, right? And then maybe his father bought some more acres and added to it as time went on. But he decided that's the bet he was going to make. And at the time, the markets were right about here when I talked to him. And I always think about this guy. That's why I'm talking about him now. I still think about him to this day. And so I wonder, did he make that bet? You know, did he make that bet? And so we see now that if you're imprudent and you make bets that you can't afford to lose, then that's where things can hit you the most, right? And so obviously, what is a virtue? What's a good habit? Well, you sit down, you look at your finances, right? You review it. You set a budget. You buy responsible investments. You talk to an advisor. You maybe do some research and reading on smart money, how to invest it. You want to reduce your risk, right? And then obviously you want to look into the type of companies you buy, right? As Catholics, our faith should be in line with how we invest our money. So we wouldn't go buying, tobacco companies, things like that. And if someone gets involved in stocks and things of that nature, although yeah, you can make money, but as Catholics, should we be making that money? Should we be buying that? Or should we be looking at things that are more in line with who we are? And then obviously, the hope is one day we'll have enough money that in our golden years, we'll be able to take care of ourselves and spend time with our grandkids. And I think of this man who made that bet, right? Did he ever get that? Is his family still paying the price for that bet? I hope not. And so I saw this at my son's school, and it really hit me, and it made a lot of sense to me. And so watch your thoughts, because your thoughts become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions become your habits become your character, and your character becomes, I would argue, your eternal destiny. So, for example, let's say if I'm always thinking ill of somebody in particular that I don't like, or if I'm being greedy with my investments and I'm not thinking clearly, right? I'll talk to people about what I'm thinking. And as time comes on, I'm going to do it. I mean, if I'm talking about it, eventually I'm going to do it. And then if I do it, I'll probably do it repeatedly. And then eventually it'll become a habit. And my habit is going to become my character. It's who I am, right? And then once my character is set, then obviously, and God's mercy is always there, but we can have a hardening of hearts where we say, you know what? It's my way. It's my way. And that can lead us to refuse God. Now, through our actions, we become either like Christ, or through our actions, we either become like the devil. So if we follow virtue to its natural conclusion, it's to become a saint and to one day be with God in heaven. If we follow vice to its natural conclusion, it's to rejecting God. It's just simple when you really think about it. It just makes logical sense. Now, imitating Christ means we cannot escape the cross. And so, I don't know if you can see this here, but it's a little bit heavy. He cuts it down a bit. Cross a little bit lighter, carries it for a while, says to God, it's still too heavy. He cuts it down, it's a bit lighter. He gets to the end of his life. The cross helps cross the chasm, and he's stuck there not being able to cross. And so, remember, the acquisition of virtue requires a little bit of suffering, because you have to say no to yourself. It's self-denial, right? And then what happens is that, but if we say yes to ourselves, the suffering comes later in the form of death. So either way, the cross is there. Either way, it's there for the good thief and it's there for the bad thief, right? It just comes down to which path are we going to choose. And with our finances, that obviously, in our world especially, it's an important decision to make. Now, this little guy sitting here, I kind of think, that's why the church prays for the dead, right? We pray for the dead. And so, I hold out hope for that guy, right? Earning money. Faith plus good works. Now, we all have to work. it's what God put us here to do. And also, it's just a reality of our life that we have to work. So when we work, we earn money, right? And that money then we hope, and that income drives our finances, and in turn, some of the decisions that we make, right? So I would suggest that if we define the term professional, there's 3 different ways to define it. Okay? Now, a professional can be a professional basketball player. It could be a professional, a plumber. It could be a race car driver. It could be a nurse, a doctor, anybody, right? So, a first definition of a professional is somebody who gets paid to perform a task, right? And we've heard that. What does that guy do for a living? He gets paid to play basketball. So we define your profession based on whether or not you get paid for it. And I find that to be interesting. And interesting that the world, and we do it too, I do it too, where we think he gets paid to do it, therefore he's a professional. If you don't get paid to do it, you're an amateur, right? But what I suggest is that a professional has a deeper meaning than that, and our finances have a deeper meaning than that. So the next level, what I would suggest of a definition of professional is someone who works to a high standard even when they don't feel like it. And that involves the Christian virtues that we already went through, right? So I don't want to do my work. There's a part of it I don't like. Do I put it for the end, or do I do it first? If I do it first, right, then that helps me to acquire virtue. So if I approach things just in that term, I can still, develop the Christian virtues within myself, right? And I can increase my understanding of a professional, which is why I have kind of a child running up the stairs. But do we want to take it to the next level, right? The next level is a professional is someone who works to a high standard, even if they don't feel like it, for God. Now, when you do things for God and not for yourself, that always involves self-sacrifice. It involves the cross. It involves love, right? Love. Because if I'm doing it for someone else, a mother who gets up at 4 a.m. to soothe a crying baby, right? There's a good example. A father who, has to go talk to the principal for his son because his son got in a fight with another kid, and when he comes home, he has to hold himself in control, not to grab his kid by the neck, right? He's exercising virtue, and if he does it for God, so if he goes to Mass on Sunday, and during the collection, and also during when the gifts are being taken up, right? He offers that as a part of his offering, right? That's what connects us to the Mass. And so that's where we do it for God. Now, I would suggest there are 2 ways to see the world when it comes to our finances. There's, and really, I don't think this needs an explanation. Because really, charitable giving is a reflection of social justice. And justice is paying to a person their due. And I would suggest that people are due food. Right? They're due that. Because that's life. You need to eat. And so you see this gentleman here giving that person their shoes. And I would suggest that is a life-changing moment for that person. And so the wrong way to see the world. And this is what I alluded to in the beginning by showing you the quick slides, was that what the world tells us is it's all about me, right? This is my money. I earned it. I don't have to share it. I'm entitled to it. I worked hard for it. I sweated for it. Who are you to tell me that I have to give anything to anybody because this is mine? That's the world, right? The right way to see the world. And what I would suggest is, where do you recognize Christ? And as I mentioned at the start, I travel throughout the Archdiocese giving talks. And I'll tell you, money brings the worst out of people, but it also brings the best out of people. It's true. I have met some real saintly people dealing with money. I really have. And I've met some not so saintly people. But maybe I caught them on a bad day, right? And so what happens is that the best story I've ever heard about giving back was from a lady who, she had a real passion for the poor. And I remember saying to her, I said, what is it about the poor that's so important to you? And when someone's really passionate, there's always a reason, right? And so what she said to me she said, Quentin, when I was a little girl, I grew up during the Great Depression. And what happened is just before Christmas, her dad lost his job. Christmas Day comes, there was no Christmas dinner for the kids, and there was no Christmas gifts for any of the children. And I can tell you, I'm sure that was pretty hard on her father. Knock at the door comes, her father gets up and answers it, and standing there was a man with Christmas dinner for the family and a shoebox gift for each of the kids. And when she opened hers, it was a pair of red mitts. And her exact words were to me, Quentin, I thought they were a gift from heaven because it was cold out there in Toronto. And so she swore when the time came, she was going to give something back to someone else. And that's how we can think of our finances and our faith. And so, I have the good fortune of being able to tell that story. And so one lady, one time, said to me, I just want to teach a child to sing. And so she made a special gift to the choir school for a child whose family couldn't afford to send them through no fault of their own. And so, I think that kindness that stranger had to her family with those red mitts impacted her, impacted the person who heard it, and now has affected a child that isn't about grade 4 right now. And what happened is, as I mentioned, his family, through no fault of their own, had a tough time. And so she stepped up to the plate, and helped him with his tuition and some of the books that he needed for school. And so this was a letter that the child wrote to her, and I'll just read it to you. Dear sponsor, I would like to thank you so much for deciding to sponsor me. I am so happy to know I will continue to stay at my amazing school. I was feeling so sad because I was not going to be able to stay at St. Michael's Choir School. I would sometimes feel like crying. But then earlier today, my mother got a call from my school director, Mr. Haddigan. I could hear my mom crying, so I asked her what was wrong. She then told me the wonderful news that you were sponsoring me. I too began to cry with joy. I feel so happy and fortunate that I was going to stay at my school with all my friends, teachers, music, and best of all, the amazing academics the school provides. I love singing and I enjoy going to concerts and Sunday masses representing my awesome school. When I grow up, I would like to become a singer and an author, and I think my school will really help me to achieve these goals of mine. I've already started writing my own books. That's why I want to thank you with all my heart for sponsoring me, because you are helping me to achieve my goals in life and helping me to earn an amazing education from my school. Thank you. And the child writes, so much. I will make a prayer for you every night. God bless you. Thank you. And so what I suggest with our finances is this is what we can do with it, right? When we step outside of ourselves and we think of others. When we think of others, we become like Christ, right? Now, we cannot be 1 hour a week Christians. Okay? So we can't go to Mass, for an hour. Hey, Father, thank you very much, and then leave. Okay? We have to be more than that. It has to seep into our everyday lives. And what I would suggest to everyone is, in thinking of these things, do you have a plan of life? When you wake up in the morning, do you think of God? Or do you think of the things you have to do? Right? Do you pray in the morning and in the evening? Or even take a few minutes throughout the day and just think about God? Do you pray the rosary? Now, I'll tell you, I have met people in my work who they get an immense sense of peace praying the rosary. Well, I can tell you, I don't get that. Right? For me, it's a struggle. I'm praying it, and I'm like, I'm saying this things over and over again. And then I have to slow down and I have to force myself to think of the words. And my hope is that that is acquiring virtue, right? Do you get to Mass every day? Can you get to Mass every day? You know, can you go at lunchtime? Are you reading a spiritual book? Do you read the Bible? You know, we say we want to get to know God, but do we actually read his book? Do we take the time to read it? And do you give God your last thought every day? Before you go to bed, do you think about it? And finally, do you have a spiritual director? Somebody who can help you on your faith journey. And what I would mention is that ordinary Christians converted an empire, the Roman Empire. When you think about it, you read church history, the first 300 years of the church, intense persecution. Nero, Domitian, intense. And yet, there was something different about the Christians that eventually led pagan Rome, more and more people, to say, I want to be like that. And so the question we need to ask ourselves is to stretch ourselves a bit. Am I like that? Am I living my faith? Is this something that am I doing what I'm saying?